Sometimes all it takes is a smell. Just this morning, someone down the hall was baking an apple pie. Lord have mercy. The scent came drifting right through my door like a ghost from the past. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and that warm, buttery crust. It was just right. Not too sweet, not too sharp. Took me back in an instant, back to fall of '97. Funny how memory works, ain't it? One minute you're sipping lukewarm coffee in a plastic mug, staring out at the birds on the feeder, and the next, well, you're standing in your old kitchen, wearing your apron, humming Patsy Cline, waiting for your only son to bring home the woman who'd end up, Lord help me, turning your whole life upside down. That smell, it cracks something open. And once it's open, well, you can't very well pretend it ain't there. You see, there's a story I've kept to myself for many, many years. Didn't speak of it much, 'cause folks don't really like to hear about broken hearts when they come from old women. They'd rather we just smile polite, offer 'em banana bread, and keep our eggs tucked away behind crocheted throws and Sunday church hats. But lately, I've been thinking, maybe it's time I shared it. Maybe it's time somebody heard it. 'Cause that smell, it didn't just remind me of the pie. It reminded me of Emma. My sweet, sunny little Emma. She used to sit on the counter swinging those little legs of hers, giggling while I peeled apples. Cut 'em thinner, Grandma. Daddy likes 'em thin, she'd say. And I always did, 'cause Emma knew her daddy. Knew him better than I ever thought Lori would. Now, back in my day, when your son brought a girl home, you made an effort. You baked, you scrubbed, you ironed your best blouse, and you prayed she had good manners and maybe a decent sense of humor. I remember that day clear as sunlight on snow. David called ahead, said he was bringing someone for supper. Said she was special. I was thrilled, honestly. My boy, who'd been working himself half to death at the shop, finally found someone. I thought, oh thank the Lord, maybe he won't be so alone anymore. And then, Lori walked through that door. Pretty little thing, no doubt. Blonde, sweet smiling, carried herself like she'd stepped right out of one of those hospital soap operas. And Lord, did she lay on the charm. Mrs. Thompson, what a lovely home, she said. Ruth, can I help set the table? I thought, land sakes alive, she's polite too. But I didn't know then. I didn't know what was underneath all that sweet talk. I didn't know that in a few short years, I'd be staring at that same table with my boxes packed, waiting for a ride to a place that smelled more like antiseptic than apples. I didn't know that was the day everything would begin to unravel. So, if you've got a minute and a kind ear, I'd like to tell you the rest of it. Not 'cause I want pity. No. I've had my share of tears and late-night prayers. I just think, sometimes, it's important to say the things we carry, so others don't feel so alone. I'll tell you what, it ain't easy bringing up a story like this. But if that pie taught me anything this morning, it's that some memories don't stay buried forever, no matter how deep you tuck 'em. So here it is, the story of how my son brought home a wife, and how that one moment, that one sweet-smelling, heart-swelling, hopeful night, was the start of everything falling apart. Let me ask you something. If someone you love started changing right in front of your eyes, would you notice it soon enough to stop it? Or would you, like me, not realize till it was far too late? Back in my day, life had a different kind of quiet to it. Not this restless, buzzing sort of quiet we got now, but the kind you feel deep in your bones, sitting on a porch swing while the sun goes down, counting the chirps of crickets and waiting for your daddy to come home from work. I grew up just outside of Beatrice, Nebraska, one of those little towns where everybody knew your middle name and whether your mother made the best peach preserves in the county. And mine did. Lord have mercy, Mama could make a peach cobbler that'd make a grown man cry. I was born in 1942, right in the middle of the war. Daddy worked on the railroad, Mama kept the house and the garden, and I was their only girl, their pride and joy, they used to say. We didn't have a pot to pee in, not really, but we made do with what we had. I wore my cousin's hand-me-downs till I was 15, and I never once felt ashamed. That's just how we did it in those days. If something tore, you sewed it. If something broke, you fixed it. And if someone you loved needed help, well, you rolled up your sleeves and you helped them. No questions asked. We lived in a little white house with green shutters and a squeaky screen door that slapped shut every time I ran through it. I can still hear the sound of that old wooden floor creaking under my feet, especially when I'd sneak to the kitchen after bedtime for a sip of lemonade. We had a coal stove that smoked like the dickens in winter and no air conditioning in the summer, so we'd sleep with the windows open and let the night air carry in the smell of fresh cut hay. You young folks wouldn't understand what it's like to fall asleep to the sound of cicadas and the breeze blowing through lace curtains. It was heaven, pure and simple. As a girl, I was quiet, a dreamer. I loved reading Little Women, Wuthering Heights, anything I could get my hands on from the school library. I believed in happy endings, in promises that stuck, in the kind of love that didn't fade. I used to sit under the big elm tree in our backyard with a notebook and write letters to people I hadn't met yet. I'd write to my future husband, to the daughter I hoped I'd have, and even to the Lord himself, asking him to make me kind and strong like my mama, and maybe a little lucky too. 'Cause life's hard enough without a little luck. I married young. That was the way it went back then. I was just 19 when I said I do to William Thompson, tall, broad-shouldered, and always smiling like he had a secret. He was a farm boy with calloused hands and a heart of gold. Bless his soul. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And when David came along, our only son, well, it was like the world opened up just for us. I thought, this is it. This is my story. Simple, good, full of laughter, homemade jam, Sunday dinners, and summers that stretched on forever. I'll tell you what, I used to believe that if you gave love, you'd get it back. That people might stumble, but they'd always find their way home. That kindness was a currency you could spend your whole life on. And maybe, just maybe, that's where I went wrong. Maybe I held on too tight to the way things used to be, and didn't see the crux for men right under my feet. But back then, I thought the world was made of soft landings and second chances. And I never imagined a time would come when the people I loved most would leave me behind without even looking back. I'll never forget that Saturday in April. It was 1960, and spring had finally chased away the last of winter's stubborn chill. The robins were back, the laundry dried fast on the line, and I was wearing a yellow dress my mama had let me borrow, a little too fancy for the church bake sale, but I was 17 and wanting to feel pretty. I'd made a tray of buttermilk cookies, still warm when I packed them up, and I remember praying they wouldn't crumble by the time I walked them down to the church basement. That's where I first saw him, William Thompson. He was standing near the back table, holding a plate of peach cobbler and Logan at something Pastor Hill had said. Lord have mercy, that boy had a laugh like honey on warm bread, smooth, deep, comforting. He was tall, with sandy hair and a sunburned neck, wearing a shirt that looked like it had seen a few too many hours in the fields. I didn't know who he was. Turns out he'd just moved from over near Hastings, come to help his uncle with the farm after his daddy passed. But I'll tell you what, I couldn't take my eyes off him. And when he looked up and caught me staring, he smiled like he'd known me all his life. I don't remember much of what I said to him that day, something about how the sugar in my cookies had clumped, cause of the humidity, and how I hoped they still tasted all right. He said they were the best he'd ever had. I thought he was lying, but in the sweetest way. I remember the way my heart beat faster, like it was trying to whisper something I hadn't figured out how to hear yet. I couldn't explain it, not then, but something deep in me knew. This boy's gonna matter. Not just today, not just for a season. For good. We started walking together after church. Then we were helping each other at Kenning socials, sitting side by side at the county fair, sharing malteds at Red's Cafe. He wasn't flashy, my William. He didn't talk big or dress sharp, but he listened when I spoke. He remembered what I liked. And when my daddy got sick that summer and we thought we might lose him, William showed up every evening with a jar of soup or a bundle of firewood. Mama said, "He's the quiet kind that don't leave when it gets hard." And she was right. That fall, I wrote in my journal, "I think I met the man I'm gonna grow old with." And I did. You know, sometimes God don't send a bolt of lightning to change your life. Sometimes it's a look across a room, or a voice that sounds like home, or a hand that reaches out when you didn't even know you were fallen. That's what William was for me. A hand that steadied me, and in time, the father of my only son. When I think back now, I wonder if that moment, seeing him across that bake sale, hearing that laugh, was where all this truly began. 'Cause if there'd been no William, there'd been no David. And if there'd been no David, well, I wouldn't be sitting here telling you this story. Funny how one person can walk into your life and shift its course like a river after the rain. I didn't know then just how much joy and sorrow that path would hold, but I knew this. That day, I wasn't just meeting a man, I was meeting my future. I suppose it started small. Most heartaches do. Not with fireworks or slamming doors, but with quiet things. A glance that lasts too long. A room that goes still when you walk in. And Lord knows, I didn't want to see it at first. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just being overprotective. Back off, Ruth, I'd say. Let the boy live his life. But deep down, something wasn't sitting right. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake that tightness in my chest. It was around 2000 when David and Lori moved back in. Said they were savant for a house, trying to be smart with their money. I understood. Times were changing. And I was glad to have them home, really. The house had felt mighty quiet since William passed in '96. Too quiet. And when little Emma was born not long after, that baby brought a light into the place that I hadn't felt in years. She'd curl up in my lap with her fuzzy little blanket and fall asleep listening to the tick of the old mantel clock, just like David used to. But things, well, they didn't stay peaceful for long. Lori started making changes around the house without a skin, rearranging the kitchen drawers, throwing out old quilts I'd made with my mama, even tossing my good Sunday dishes into the donation box, 'cause she said they were chipped and dated. And every time I'd speak up, she'd smile that sweet smile of hers and say, "Oh, Ruth, we're just trying to help you modernize." Help me, like I was some relic gathering dust. At first, I said nothing. I told myself it was just her way. She liked control, liked things just so. But then came the whispering. I'd walk into a room, and they'd go quiet. I'd find receipts for things they said they couldn't afford. And more than once, Lori hinted that maybe I was forgetting things, that maybe it was time for me to rest more and worry less about the house. I'll tell you the truth, I was scared. Not of Lori, not even of David. I was scared of disappearing, of becoming that woman folks talk over instead of to, and I was angry too. But it was the kind of anger you don't know where to put. I still folded their laundry, still packed little treats for Emma's lunch, still left the porch light on when they came home late. Because that's what you do when you love someone, even when they're slowly slipping away from you. And David, oh my David, he didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. He'd say, "Ma, just let Lori handle it, or she means well." He stopped to skin my opinion. Stopped sitting at the table after supper to talk. Started disappearing into the garage the minute he got home. And me, I started talking to the Lord more and more, whispering in the dark, asking him if I was the problem. If I was getting too old, too set in my ways. There was one night, I remember it clear. I overheard Lori on the phone saying, "She's gotta go. We can't live like this forever." She didn't say my name, but I knew. My heart dropped clean out of my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands folded in my lap like a child waiting to be scolded. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt empty, like someone taking a broom to my insides. You know, people think growing old means you get used to things. But some hurts. They still surprise you. They still feel sharp. Like the first time someone turns away when you reach for their hand. I didn't tell anyone. Not my church ladies. Not my cousin Millie. Not even Pastor Hill. I didn't want to seem dramatic. I didn't want to believe what I already knew. But inside me, a little voice was starting to say, "Ruth, something is terribly wrong." And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it. I remember the way the light looked that morning. Pale, gray, barely there, like the sun itself didn't want to show up. The house was so quiet you could hear the radiator hissing from the hallway, and even the birds outside seemed to know something was wrong. I stood at the kitchen sink, washing Emma's cereal bowl, holding it a little longer than I should have. I liked that bowl, pink with little faded butterflies. She always asked for that one. Only this one. Grandma, she'd say, like it held some kind of magic. And maybe, to her, it did. That was the last morning I'd ever wash it. David came into the kitchen with his eyes already lowered, and my heart, Lord have mercy, it started beating like a drum in a funeral march. He didn't sit, didn't take off his jacket, just stood there like a man carrying something heavy that wasn't his to carry. And before he even opened his mouth, I knew. Isn't it strange how sometimes your body knows before your mind's caught up? "Ma," he said, voice rough, "we think it's time you found your own place." I couldn't breathe. Not really. My hands were still in the dishwater, so clinging to my skin like it didn't want to let go. I turned around slow, like maybe I'd heard wrong, like maybe if I gave him enough time, he'd take it back. But he didn't. He just looked past me like I was already gone. And then she came in. Lori, not a hair out of place. Calm as ever. "We've looked into a few options for you," she said, laying a folder on the counter like it was a casserole recipe. "There's a nice assisted place just outside of Lincoln. You'll have privacy, staff to help, and we can visit on Sundays." Sundays. Like I was some obligation to be penciled into their week. The air went cold in my lungs. I felt dizzy, like the room was tilting, and I was the only thing not bolted to the floor. My legs were shaken, but I stayed upright. I had to. I wasn't gonna let them see me fall. "I've given you this home," I said quietly, 'cause if I spoke louder, the crack in my voice would split open. "I've paid rent, groceries, took care of Emma, and now you want me gone?" David didn't look at me. Not once. I think that's what broke me. Not the words. Not even the decision. It was the look in my son's eyes, or rather, the lack of one. Like I wasn't his mother anymore. Like I was a burden they'd finally worked up the courage to push out the door. I packed 2 bags. Just the essentials. Left the quilts I made. Left the pie dishes. Left the photos, 'cause I didn't have the strength to look at 'em. Lori called the car. Some hired driver showed up. No hugs. No goodbyes. Just the soft click of the door closing behind me and the sound of a clock ticking in the hallway that suddenly felt deafening. I remember looking at that front door as the car pulled away and thinking, that's the last time I'll ever see my home. And it was. I lost more than a house that day. I lost my place in the family I built with my bare hands. I lost the laughter of my granddaughter drifting down the hallway. I lost the one boy I raised to be better than this, the one I thought would protect me. And something inside me changed. There's a kind of grief that don't make noise. It just settles into your bones and stays there quiet, cold, permanent. That's what I carried with me that day. And I'll tell you this. No matter how strong you are, no matter how much grace you've got left in your heart, there's nothing quite like being turned into a stranger in the very home where you once sang lullabies. After the door closed, there was just quiet. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind you get sitting on a porch with your coffee while the morning dew still clings to the grass. No, this was the kind of quiet that hums in your ears and makes the world feel too big. I remember riding in the back of that car, hands in my lap, staring out the window at the fields rolling by. I didn't cry. Not then. I just watched. The trees were bare, the sky a dull silver, and the road ahead didn't look like it led anywhere I wanted to go. The assisted living place was clean, quiet. Folks were kind enough, but it wasn't home. There were no creaky floorboards, no smell of supper simmering in the kitchen, no Emma running down the hallway wearing my slippers on the wrong feet. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of wheelchairs softly moving down the hallway like ghosts with rubber soles. The first few nights, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie there with my hands over my stomach, staring up at the ceiling, listening for sounds that would never come. David's heavy steps on the porch, Emma's giggle, even Laurie's voice, clipped and cold. Funny, isn't it? The things you miss, even when they hurt. I kept expecting someone to call, or knock, or remember. But nobody did. The holidays came and went. I got a card in the mail with no handwriting, just a printed message and their names signed at the bottom. Love, David, Laurie, and Emma. No, dear Mom. No, we miss you. Just ink on paper. I held that card for a long time before I set it face down on my dresser. I didn't go to church for a while. I didn't knit. I didn't bake. The days all bled together like watercolor on wet paper, soft edges, no shape. I ate because I had to. I smiled at the nurses because they were kind. I even started keeping a little notebook by my bed, writing a line or two every day just to prove to myself I was still here, still real. You know, I used to believe in the goodness of people, truly. I believed that if you gave enough love, showed enough patience, stayed kind no matter what, the world would give it back to you somehow. But after that day, I wasn't so sure anymore. It's not that I stopped believing in love. I just stopped expecting it to come back the way I gave it. And I'll tell you, the hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the feeling of being erased, like I'd been scratched out of the story and no one noticed the blank space I left behind. There's a deep kind of pain in being forgotten, not because you did wrong, but because you were no longer convenient. Still, I got up. Every day. I brushed my hair. I made my bed. I watched the birds gather outside my window and whispered their names like I used to with Emma, Cardinal, Finch, Morning Dove. I started writing down pieces of my life, page by page, not for anyone else, just for me, to remember who I was, who I still am, underneath all the silence and dust. And slowly, very slowly, the ache turned into something else. Not peace, not yet, but stillness. Like the kind after a storm when the trees stop moving and the earth is waiting, not quite healed, but no longer breaking. I wasn't the same Ruth I used to be. I don't think I ever will be. But in that quiet, I found Something. Not forgiveness, maybe, but the space where forgiveness might grow one day if the light finds its way in. It happened on a Tuesday, just after lunch. I'd taken my tray back to the cart and was wandering down the hallway, slower than usual, my bones aching more than I cared to admit. I wasn't in a rush, Lord knows there wasn't anywhere I had to be. But as I passed the activity room, I heard Logan. Real Logan. That bright, deli deep kind that makes you stop, even if you weren't planning to. I peeked in and saw a group of kids, little ones, must have been from the school nearby, all wearing name tags and paper crowns made from construction paper. There was a woman with M, their teacher I guess, explaining that it was Grand Friends Day and they were here to read stories with the residents. One boy was trying to adjust his glasses and talk at the same time, and it made his words fall out in the funniest way. The room was glowing, not from the lights, from the sound of it all. Life. I nearly walked past. I really did. Part of me said, you don't belong in there. That's for the ones with grandkids still coming around. That's not you anymore. But just as I turned to go, a little girl, couldn't have been more than 7, came right up to me and said, "Do you want to read with me, ma'am?" No hesitation. No pity. Just a question, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I looked at her. Brown eyes, crooked pigtails, chocolate on her chin. And I don't know what came over me, but I said, "Sure, honey. I'd like that very much." Her name was Rachel. She read slow, her finger trailing under each word, and she'd glance up at me every now and then like she was checking if I was still with her. I smiled and nodded, even helped her sound out the hard ones. And when she finished, she said, "You remind me of my grandma. She tells stories too." Then she handed me a little card she'd drawn a heart with too many legs, like a bug, and said, "I made this one for you." I tell you what, that little piece of paper is still tucked inside my Bible, right between Psalms and Proverbs. That day was small, but it was different. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a shadow passing through the halls. I felt seen, not for what I'd lost, but for what I still had. I still had a voice, a memory, a lap for a child to sit on, and hands that could hold a book steady while little eyes tried to make sense of it. So I started showing up, not just for the kids, but for the others, too. I'd help Mrs. Carver with her puzzles when her hands shook too much. I'd bring butterscotch candies for Mr. Jensen, who never said much but always smiled when I handed him one. I even signed up to lead Tuesday Storytime once a month. I'd read Laura Ingalls Wilder and make up a few tales of my own about chickens that danced or gardens that grew cookies. Silly things, but they made people laugh. And in all that giving, something started stirring inside me again. Not joy, not yet, but hope. Hope that maybe my story wasn't over just 'cause one chapter ended in heartbreak. That maybe, just maybe, there was more life left in me. Not the kind I'd planned for, not with Emma or David by my side, but a different kind. Quieter, slower, but real all the same. I still had cracks. I still had days where the silence came back and wrapped around me like a winter coat. But now there were also days with laughter, with paint on my fingers and crumbs on my sweater and little voices calling me Miss Ruth. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that something was enough to keep going. It was a Thursday. Rainy. The kind of soft, whispering rain that taps gentle on the window, like someone knocking from the other side of time. I was sitting at my little writing desk by the window. Same spot I always take when the weather turns and the world slows down. The notebook I keep open most days was there, pages full of half-remembered thoughts, pie recipes, and little sketches of birds Emma used to love. I hadn't written in a few days. I'd been carrying around this heavy ache again, not the sharp kind, but the dull one that settles deep when the calendar flips, and you realize it's been over a decade since you last saw your granddaughter's smile. I don't know what stirred me that day. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the silence. But I opened that drawer, the one I'd avoided for years, and pulled out the old envelope. It was worn soft from being touched so many times, but never opened. Inside was the picture, the last one of the three of them. David, Laurie, and Emma. Easter Sunday, 2010. Emma was wearing a lavender dress with white tights and holding the basket I'd crocheted. David had that proud, crooked smile. And Laurie, well, she looked right through the camera like always. I'd kept that photo buried for so long, thinking if I looked at it too long, it'd turn to ash in my hands. But that day, I didn't look away. I studied it, let the grief rise up, let the tears fall without fighting them, and then I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in all these years. I forgive you, not because they asked, not because they deserved it, but because I needed it. I'd carried that wound like it was stitched into me, like it was part of who I was. But I realized, sitting there with that photo in my lap and the rain tapping soft against the glass, that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life holding on to something that heavy. It wasn't helping me remember the good. It was only helping me stay stuck. So I did something I never thought I would. I got up, walked slow to the small garden out back, the one we residents tend to when our knees will let us, and I dug a little hole by the rose bush. I laid the photo down inside and covered it gently with soil. No drama, no big moment. Just me and the earth and the decision to let it rest. That was the day I chose to stop waiting for an apology. Stop replaying the moment the door closed. Stop wondering what I could have said or done different. I stopped writing questions and started writing recipes again. I joined a hymn circle even though my voice ain't what it used to be. I started wearing color again, bright things like mustard and coral, the kind Emma used to say made me look like a sunrise. I'll tell you what, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means saying, yes, it happened, and no, it won't break me anymore. I chose to live forward, without demands, without bitterness, just forward, not for them, for me, and maybe in some quiet corner of the world, that little girl in the lavender dress still remembers the way her grandma's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and soap. Maybe not, but either way, I remember, and that's enough now. You know, when you get to be my age, folks think you're full of wisdom, like the years just hand it to you along with your pension check and a pair of orthopedic shoes. But the truth is, wisdom don't come easy. It comes through losing things you thought were forever, through waiting for calls that never come, through saying I'm fine when you're not, just so you don't make someone uncomfortable. I've learned more in silence than I ever did in conversation. And the biggest thing I've learned, that holding on too tight to what should have been will keep you from seeing what still could be. Back in my day, we didn't talk much about feelings. You stitched them into pies, prayers, and Sunday dresses. You didn't go around spilling your sorrow into other folks' laps. But let me tell you, sorrow'll find a way out, whether you give it permission or not. I spent years carrying quiet pain, thinking maybe if I waited long enough, things would fix themselves. That David would call. That Emma would remember. That Laurie would, well, just see me. But time don't always bring healing. Sometimes it just brings distance. And that's okay. Because here's what I know now. You don't need everyone to understand your story in order for it to be true. You don't need permission to grieve, and you sure don't need an invitation to move on. There comes a point when you stop asking, why, and start asking, what now? For me, what now looked a lot smaller than I imagined. It wasn't a grand reconciliation or some dramatic reunion at the door. It was a warm blanket folded for a neighbor. It was raising my hand to read a story in a room full of wiggly kids. It was sitting by the window with a cup of tea and saying, "I'm still here, and I matter, even if no one says it back." I used to believe that family was everything, and in some ways I still do. But now I believe this too. Family is who stays when it's hard, who shows up when it's inconvenient, who listens without fixing, and loves without keeping score. And if you can find one or two folks like that in your life, well, that's more than most. People ask me if I regret anything, and sure I do. I regret the times I kept quiet to keep the peace. I regret all the times I softened the truth to make others comfortable. But I don't regret loving, not once, even if it cost me. And maybe you, sitting there listening, maybe you've got something you're still waiting on. An apology, a change, a return. Let me ask you something. How long are you going to keep waiting for someone to give you permission to live your own life? Maybe it's time to stop holding your breath for things to go back to what they were. Maybe it's time to start breathing where you are. Because sometimes the healing doesn't come wrapped in an answer. Sometimes it's just in the decision to keep going, softer, slower, maybe, but still forward. So what have I learned? That forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. That grief don't mean the love is gone. That even in a world that forgets you, you can still remember who you are. And that sometimes, the strongest thing you'll ever do is simply get up, dust off your heart, and say, "I'm still here, and I'm not done yet." Well, if you've stayed with me this long, bless your heart. I wasn't sure anyone still had the patience to sit through an old woman's story, especially one with no tidy bow at the end. But I'm glad you did. Truly. You see, this wasn't just about David, or Lori, or even sweet little Emma. It was about holding on and learning when to let go. About what happens to a heart after it's been cracked a few too many times, and how sometimes, even after all that, it still finds a way to keep beating. I've told this story sitting in my favorite chair by the window, the one that faces the west, so I can watch the light fall slow across the fields in the evening. I've got a warm cup of tea next to me, chamomile, with a touch of honey. That's how I take it. Always have. And as I look out at the wind stirring through the trees, I can't help but think life's a lot like this cup. Warm for a while, gentle, then one day it goes cool. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss the moment when it's just right. Sometimes I wonder where they are now. David, Lori, Emma. I hear they moved to Kansas City. Haven't spoken in years. No letters, no photos. And yet, every now and then, when I see a teenage girl with brown curls and quiet eyes, my heart flutters like it's remembering something it can't quite explain. And I think, maybe that's her. Maybe she's out there, ordering coffee at a bookstore, or walking past sunflowers without knowing her grandma used to plant them every spring. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, I let myself believe she does remember. That maybe she holds a soft corner of memory with my name on it. A smell, a song, the feel of a hand tugging a blanket up to her chin. It's not proof, but it's something, and I hold on to that. You know, I spent so long thinking love had to look a certain way, that it had to be close, visible, unbroken. But now I know better. Love isn't always neat. Sometimes it leaves. Sometimes it chooses silence. But even when it slips through your fingers, it leaves a warmth. And if you let it, that warmth can still hold you on the coldest days. So let me ask you, do you believe real love always finds its way back? Or are there some goodbyes that were always meant to last? I don't have the answer. I don't pretend to. But I think maybe the skin is enough. Maybe what matters is that we keep our hearts open, not to the past, but to the possibility of something new. A kind word, a second chance, A hand held in a quiet moment with no expectation but presence. And maybe that's what I want you to take from all this. Not the sadness, not the loss, but the strength of still showing up, still loving, still hoping, even with a heart that's been through the ringer. Because if there's one thing I've learned sitting by this window, it's this. We don't get to rewrite what's behind us, but we sure as sugar can choose how we carry it forward. So, if you've got someone to call, call Am. If you've got something to say, say it. If there's a part of your life that's been stuck in a drawer like an old photo, maybe today's the day you take it out, dust it off, and decide what it means now. And me? Well, I'll be here, watching the light change, listening to the birds, maybe reading one of my old paperbacks again. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I feel her nearby. Not in a picture, not in a voice, just a feeling, like a whisper in the air. And maybe that's enough.